So we're looking at the front of the blouse, at the paper pattern on it. And if you look at the shoulder, there's some pin tucks. There's 4 pin tucks that we're going to add in. There's a dart from the waist down that's been divided into 2. So you're going to just sew them from the waist to the bottom. So we'll start with the pin tucks. So I'm marking, I can see the tops of my lines here for my pin tucks, and I'm just lifting my pattern piece and marking the bottom, just a little pencil dot, barely there. So I've marked the top and the bottom. So now I can crease, and I'm just going to finger crease the line there. You can take it over to the iron as well, on each one where the pin tuck should be. Make sure they're even. Yeah. And then you'll have the creases of where your pin tuck should be. You can take a pin to mark the base. I'm just putting a little prick mark with the pin for the base of it, so I know on the other side. I can see that line and I know where to stop stitching. So where I put that little pencil mark. And then on the other side you can I don't know if you can make that out, you can just see the mark there. So I can come along with my 2mm piping cord, turn it over, and I'm going to pipe along that edge. But I'm going to stitch on the front side towards the sleeve, so I want my stitch line to be there, and my sleeve armhole is this direction. That way my underneath thread, I can tease my top thread underneath and tie it off. So at this point you can tuck if you like, to tuck the cord in place. But you've got to be careful, because the more pins you put in, the more holes it leaves behind, because it's very fine fabric, especially on the silk it will mark, so make sure you're using very fine pins. I'm using a 60 weight needle on the machine, so it will be finer holes and not leave big holes. So same if you're using a hand stitching to tuck it in place. Use a very fine needle and a single thread, and I'm just using a coloured thread so you can see it on the video. And keeping your cord in that crease, just tuck along the base of it. So I'm going down to my pencil mark, it is just there. So I'm just going to tuck to that point. And then on the front it will be. So if you do that to all 4 of them, and then with the zipper foot you'll machine along. So when you go into the left shoulder, I'm going to turn and I'm going to top stitch from that angle. If I'm doing the other side, I do it the opposite way. because I want my top thread to be on this side and my under thread to be under here, because then once I've done that, I will tease the thread from the top to the underside and tie it in a knot. So now I've machined the pin tucks against the cord. So this is the last one, the cord's in it. And I've machined from the top here, bottom thread is underneath, towards the armhole. And then I've just pulled the cord out. And then you press them over. And they should all be the same size. Then make sure when you stitch, you don't back stitch anywhere. This, it leaves the stitching a little bit ugly. When it's on fine fabric like that, it makes it look a mess. So what you do on the bottom here, I'm taking the underneath thread. So this is why I sewed with the top thread on this side and the under thread towards the armhole. So now I can pull the under thread and just tease the top thread. You can see it's just a little loop, and then you can pull the top thread through to the underside. And then you can tie a knot. Do it twice, make sure it's, and then you can snip that off. And then it's hid underneath the pin tuck. So you got a really nice, neat little stitch line there, no ugly back stitch, and you can't see the knot because it's underneath the pin tuck. So do that on all four of them. And on the other side, do it the opposite way, making sure your pin tucks are going towards the armhole. So now you can see the pin tucks are all in place, and you can see it shaping for the bust area. This is the underneath of the collar, so it's a rolled collar, and when it folds back, it's just gonna obscure the top bit of the shoulder of the pin tucks, but you'll still see them coming down, and then they'll just fall straight on the body and make room for the bust area. So the darts, you can see the tops of the darts at the waist here and here. So I'm going to stick a pin in the two tops so I can bring it together evenly. And down to the bottom, and I'm bringing it and finger pressing a line so we can see my dart line. So I'm going to stitch from here without back stitching all the way to here and just run it off. You're going to come nearly to the hem and just run it off. Don't back stitch again, and then we'll tie them off like we did the pin tucks. So depending on what direction you want your darts to lean to, I'm going to put them towards the side seam. So I would stitch on this side, under stitch here, and then I can lean them that way. So same with this one. Yep. So they look like this. So I want them to go over that way. So I'm going to tease my thread from the other side like I did on the pin tucks. Oop, my thread's cut. I'm going to tease a thread from the other side. And tie them off. So I'll do that top and bottom. And then I can press them towards the side seam. And then I'll press them down properly with the iron in that direction. So it will look like that. And then it's left your area there for your bust. It will sort of bag out over the waist, and that will fit in, tuck into your skirt or trousers. So now we're looking at the collar facing. It's in two pieces. So the collar part is cut on the fold, so it's on the bias, and then the lower part of it here is on the straight. So you want to interface this. So if you cut your interfacing out with no seam allowance, so it just fits inside. But you don't want to add bulk to the seams. And same on the straight piece here. So take them to the iron, press them, make sure it's adhered really well to it, and then you can sew them together. So I've ironed my interfacing onto my roll collar facing, and here's the lower part. So what I need to do now is join these together here. So you're just going to join them, machine stitch them, leave the edges raw and press them open. And then you'll just press them open like that. So do that on both sides. So I've joined them all together now. So I've machined, you can see the green thread. I'm just using green so that it's visible on the video. Use the color of whatever fabric you're using. And then I've pressed it open. So I've done that on both sides. So now I've got the facing, the collar facing. And if you look at where the neck, where you're going to attach the neck, the square bit here, you've got these two long edges here. So this is the front edge that's going to go around the edge of the collar, and then it turns in and you've got this. So what you want to do is do a stitch. If you just put your foot, the width of your foot there, and stitch down the center of it. So do that on both sides. And then if you trim right close to that, nice clean cut. And then you're going to turn it in and then stitch on top of the line again. So if you do that on both sides, that will stop it fraying, the stitch line will stop it fraying and stretching. So here it's all trimmed. I pressed it over the edge of the interfacing, and on this side I've stitched again. So if you look at the other side, there's just one stitch on the other side. So you just stitch on top of this stitch again, and then it looks like this. The finished edge. So then now it's ready to attach to the collar. So now I've attach the facing to the body of the blouse. And I've started from the center back up here, and I pinned it just in the seam allowance. And I've gone to the dip of this next scallop and pinned it there. So in the dip of each scallop, I pinned it. Then I've gone to the high point of each scallop and pinned it. Just in the seam allowance. So it looks like it's kind of a little bit big, but when you're sewing it, you'll ease it in. So you can put a few more pins in if you want with silk to control it. This is okay because it's just long. And then pin it down the center front as well. Then you're going to machine from the center back, and you're going to machine along the scallops 3 millimeters away from your interfacing. So you're creating a row line, space for a row line. So 3 millimeters away from the facing, all along the scallop. When you get to the break line here, where it starts going straight, then you can stitch right beside, down the center front. So the center front is just going to be turned back and folded evenly, but on the scallop you're creating a row line, so it's going to roll back. When you machine it, again machine from the center back, down one side, and then start at the center back again and go down the other side. Don't machine from one side all the way to the other, because it might shift as you do that. So stitching it from one side and then the other distributes the bias evenly, so it helps it balance out. So I'll go away and do that. So now to turn it the right way, so we want to trim it down to 5 millimeters all the way along. So go all the way down like that, and then clip in each dip of the scallop. And you can clip a few on the other as well. So you might get away with, because you've cut it down narrow, not having to clip so much. So just clip in the dips first, and then turn it in and check it. If it's pulling or anything, you can come back and do a few more clips. So do that on all the scalloped bits up to the break line. So this is the other side turned back. So you can see I've created the row line. So I've turned it inside back the right way, and I've rolled the back now here. So this becomes the collar. So on the side with the facing now becomes the front of the collar. So you want to roll that back underneath it. So slightly, you can just see there, I've just rolled it a little bit. So that way from the front edge you don't see the stitch line. So roll it back at 3 millimeters till you get to your break line. And then you can just iron the straight bit evenly. Give it a good press. And then you should be ready. So do that on both sides. So now, lay it out so you collar, this is your neck line here, and these are your shoulders. So tuck it in place, make sure you get your corners correct both sides, so stick your pin in the corner like that, check it's meeting on the other side. And check your lines are matching here, your shoulder seam allowance line. and your allowance for the neck. So what we want to do now is make a stay stitch. So you're not going to sew on the carbon line, the proper line, just yet. You're going to sew in from it a few millimeters. So you're going to stitch here, turn the corner around, make it secure. Because then when you come to put your yoke on, when you do the first side, you will again stitch in from the seam allowance. When you add the other side, then when they're all together, you will stitch through on the proper true seam allowance line. So first we're going to do the stay stitch. So I've done my little stay stitch, and a little trick I've used, I put the center of my foot on the true stitch line, carbon line, and then switched my position of my needle over as if you're using a zipper foot, and then that way it's given me like about 4 mils, 3-4 mil exactly, so it's given me a really clean straight line. Oops. So now I clip the corners up to the stitch line, just using the tip of my scissors. I don't want to go like this in case I go too far. So I'm just going to clip and clip. So now I've got my one side of my yoke, and I'm going to pin it in place, making sure my carbon lines and my center back are in the true spot. Make sure my corners are on the corner, my carbon paper, carbon line. This looks like it's a little bit big here, but you're going to ease that in. So get my corner and my corner of my, on the main part. Oh, there it is. So I will ease these in. Just shift that over very slightly. And then I can turn the corner and stitch up this side. So match my seam allowances there. So again, hit the corner, and the corner on there. Check my seam allowances are matching up. So I've tacked it in. I've tacked the yoke in by hand, and I've just tacked it just inside my seam allowance carbon paper mark. So I've tucked it in, so I've worked from this center back, down the side, and then center back again and down the other side. So now I'm going to do the same with the other yoke. So I'll tuck it in. And once that's in, then I can machine the two. So now I've tucked the front and back yoke to the neckline and shoulders, so it's sandwiched between. And I'm going to come and machine stitch this now. So up until now I've been using a number 2 stitch length everywhere because it's very fine fabric. For here, I think I'm going to go to 2.5, maybe a 3, because I've got 3 layers here, and where the pintucks are, there's 5 layers. So depending on what fabric you're using, you can adjust the length of your stitch. So I'll go away and do that. Be very careful when you come to the corner, because you've got the bulk inside. You can see where I've clipped it. Make sure you catch the corner properly and then turn down, but you don't pinch any fabric. So here it is all pressed, it's all ready to go into the next stage. So if you look at it, there's the yoke. It's set in nice on the corner, and I'm ready to put the back panel on. The top one will be machined on, and the bottom one will be hand stitched in, so it's sandwiched between the two. And then it's put the side seams together. So making sure I'm working on the top of the garment, I've pinned the back panel to just the top yoke, and I'll machine that. I've also put the darts in the back from the waist down like I did on the front, so just copy what you did at the front. And I've ironed them towards the side seams. So I'll go machine that now. So I've machined it now, and I pressed the seam allowance up. You can trim this down to sort of half of that if you want. And then I'm going to bring the bottom down, and I'm going to catch it under and just cover the stitch line. Pin it in place, and then I would slip stitch that. So we all know how to slip stitch. Yeah. So all the way along. So the yoke's all laid down now, hand stitched on the inside, darts going to the outside towards the side seams, and now we're going to do a French seam on the side seam. So sew into on the top first, pin at your points. So pin at the top, pin at your waist. So you've got your pattern marks here. And what you're going to do is, your machine line is here. So your first stitch, you're going to do sort of halfway in between the seam allowance and stitch on a number 2 stitch all the way down. So I've machined it, as you can see. So if it's not thin or it's jaggy or whatever, just trim it. Make sure it's nice and tidy, all even. All the way down, and then what you're going to do is bring it to the inside, press it, bring it to the inside, and then I don't know if you can see the shadow of the seam allowance is just coming up before my carbon paper line. So I'll machine this side on the carbon paper line, encasing all the raw edge in between, so making sure none of it's peeping out on the other side. I don't want none of the selvage peeping out. So I'll go press it and do that. So I've gone stitch that turned it in, sandwiched it so it's come to here now, and I've stitched on the carbon line. So when you come to the front, so it's a complete finished seam inside, and on the front you just see a nice tiny little seam allowance, encased seam allowance. Better than if you overlocked it, you'd see all the overlocking would show through, because it's the fabric you can see through, so you don't want a big thick ugly seam allowance. So fine fabrics, French seam is a really nice way of finishing them off. So there's your French seam, and do that on the other side. Then you're ready to hem it, and then we'll go on to do the sleeve.